Welcome, I'm Daniel Diez, Editor-in-Chief of Interbrand IQ, and I'm sitting here today with Diez Frampton, Global CEO and Chairman of Interbrand. Welcome, Diez.
It's always a pleasure to see you, Daniel.
So we have an article this month coming out with Jeff Hansen of Microsoft talking about the Surface tablet, and it strikes me that a lot of technology companies now are making big bets on devices, and it's really a promise about the brand is sort of all encapsulated in this one device. Think it's a good idea, or you think they're putting too many eggs in one basket?
Well, I think, interestingly, when you first build a brand, quite often it does happen on the back of an individual product. I mean, if you take a look at somebody like Apple, the first big breakthrough was the iPod and iTunes, and that kind of transformed the way that we thought about them. Now, if you then have a very powerful brand that you've built, actually it gives you a bit of protection in case sometimes the products don't go as well as you thought. The danger of what they're doing, though, is that they are educating consumers into believing that this is the only important thing, that it's always about the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And I suppose the experience, certainly from my perspective, seems to be that actually the changes between one product and the next, one release and another, the differences are getting less and less. And I think you see in some of the consumer blogs around the releases of the last iPhone and indeed the releases around the Samsung products, and the differences between them are getting more and more marginal.
This is the Apple syndrome now. So it's just iteration after iteration and no great big breakthrough.
Well, it's interesting, because I know there's current sort of discussion about the fact that Apple hasn't released a product for a while. I mean, in reality, they've always had actually a relatively slower release cycle on many of their products. They always get a big fanfare around it, but one of their sort of points of genius, I suppose, is that they've been very good editors. They do actually focus very carefully on the products that they think they're important to the company, and have been, well known for actually putting things on the back burner when they think it might get in the way. So, on one hand, yes, they've helped to create this because they're the ones that created the big song and the dance, and Steve Jobs standing up and giving us the latest revelation. So, of course, what everyone else has done has followed on that. So it makes you feel like there's almost a new one coming out every other week.
So now how does the BlackBerry launch of the 10 and the 7 compare to what Apple's doing, and do we think it's going to have the same effect that the iPhone had for Apple?
Well, I know that's what BlackBerry hope. And interestingly, of course, when you saw the first industry response actually to the new operating system and the new Z10, it was very good. People said that it was an easy to use platform, quite straightforward. And of course, BlackBerry do have millions and millions of users around the world. I think the question is whether or not they've slightly gone off the boil, though. I mean, around 2 or 3 years ago, they had this massive influx of consumers into the brand. There's shifts going on in what's going on in the way that companies issue mobile phones and the degree to which actually they want to have, people taking their own phones or bringing their own ones in.
Sure, it feels like they're competing now.
Yeah, their grip on the business marketplace is definitely not as strong as it was. They got slightly distracted perhaps by looking at consumers. Now they've turned their head back to look at the business market, and it's changed.
Do they have to choose? Do they have to pick one or the other in order to survive?
I don't think they do. I mean, interestingly enough, Apple has always focused very, very firmly on consumers and a very, very clear idea of what type of person it is. It's always been about the slightly more creative of mind and think different and everything else.
Right.
And by building that image of their brand around those kinds of people, interestingly enough, they have actually managed to transcend quite nicely into the business market. And actually, historically, in the mobile phone market, the ones who tended to be stronger were the ones who started off with a very, very strong business base. But I wonder whether or not BlackBerry are going to be able to rush back into their homeland fast enough in order to stop the likes of Samsung, Apple and the rest of them sort of taking away what was once their domain.
Great. Well, thanks very much for joining us. Stay tuned for the next issue of IQ.